Hello and welcome to the No Script Show. New CSS specifications are coming faster than we can understand them. If we tried to cover them all at one time, we would probably not be able to see the wood for the trees. So instead, we're going to step back and see if we can understand the overall direction. As always, making this show hang together, doing all the work really, is David Wormsley. How you doing, David?
I'm good. The reason for this episode really is that I'm starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by all of this kind of programmatic CSS that we're starting to see, all these if statements and that function and all this stuff. I can't keep up, and I've just got into CSS and I really love it, and I've found a way to make it simple, and now my head is mush again.
Can I ask you a question? How
Yes.
good were you at programming? Because it always bamboozled me. I could always see that there were people significantly better at retaining the concepts after reading a page. In the day when you and I learned, everything was in a physical book with pages that you would turn. And I would remember getting to the end of whole chapters thinking I'd got it, and then restart the chapter and think, oh, actually I've forgotten more or less everything that happened. I was never good at programming, basically. So I could see why maybe this would cause you some level of fear.
Yeah, and it's also because I did a little presentation for your thing that you do, this Page Builder Summit, where I've been talking to Page Builder users like I was, and tried to encourage them to look at CSS and how wonderful it is. And you realize that you've got all this kind of, if you try and pick things up from YouTube videos now, you can really get lost because everybody's excited about all this new kind of dynamic stuff that's coming in CSS. So you could really get lost in all of that, which I'm starting to do. So I need this in a way, partly because if anybody does see that presentation comes here, it might be a bit of a follow-on from kind of what I was trying to say there. But also it's about me trying to just getting my head straight again, if you like, and recapping on what we've been doing with this show.
Yeah, I guess if you were to look at it from a long way off, if you were to have distance and perspective, better to have things to learn than it's stagnating. Although it's easy to say, but better to have things that are happening, exciting things, difficult maybe, but better that it's that it's moving on and pushing forwards and getting more complicated, and therefore the options available to developers, the youths, David, the young ones who are going to come along and just grasp it in a heartbeat. It's better. It is better for the web in general. So okay, that's the message here. Do you want me to put the
let's have the notes up, because
that'll
help me to wander through this. So if we can start on just what's changing at the moment, basically this, because I'm saying programmatic language, and I see other people kind of in groups and stuff saying, oh, so CSS is becoming a programming language now. And I think there's been a long debate. There was a good CSS Tricks article actually about that, where I think, was it Chris Coyer, was getting very frustrated when people say, is it a programming language? And I know others do. Hayden Pickering is quite sharp with people who say that it isn't, that CSS isn't a programming language, because they say, yes, it is, works on a computer,
Right, okay. So that definition, it is a programming language. But
well, it is in that way. But if you Google it now, which I did just before the show there, it says, no, not really. It's a presentational language.
Okay.
So you get into this for ages. But I think the key thing is well, we've mentioned this on the show before, but there is a big difference, I think, in code. And I think this is the thing I've had to get there's a sort of a feeling that all code is difficult, which I think is why people will be attracted to page builders, as I was when CSS appeared difficult to me. But I think there is a difference between the declarative languages of HTML and CSS, where you only get to hint what the browser does, and the browser has to protect the content for the users. So you can be bad at coding with HTML and CSS, and the browser knows to ignore all the rubbish you stick in there and just display everything it can, which is not the case with the traditional imperative languages, because they have to work. Someone has to have control what they code in via logic, which is what I'm not very good at. Well,
that encapsulates it perfectly. Yeah. That's me too.
Yeah. And those are JavaScript and PHP on that. And I think But what's interesting, I think, for me, this is my understanding of it. When we get to the programming language we're talking about, and I think what we're seeing here is the stuff that's been introduced that we'll call a programming language is about still sticking with the declarative stuff. It's more about giving better hints to the browser. In the fact that we now have intrinsic web design where we need to tell the browser to do some maths on our behalf to display things in the way that we want them, no?
Yes. Yeah.
So
go on.
No. That was basically it. I am my own trying to get my head around this. Is that CSS is still this simple declarative language where we say we'd like this to be red, but okay, browser, if the user says they want a false color on it, you don't give them our red. That's fine. I can live with that. It's still that sort of simple thing which we can deal with as communicators. I think intrinsic design requires, because of the programmatic side, what Jen Simmons said in the very first episode we said about this, we're now programming a flexibility model for the web. I think that the demands of all the different devices we have to serve now means that we need that kind of stuff to be in our CSS.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been really nice about CSS is it has been really forgiving. If you do something that basically doesn't work, it still works. Nothing will collapse, and you're not going to be, at the end of the road. If you do something wrong, let's say, for example, with PHP in the CMS that I use, WordPress, then there's a total catastrophe. Everything just breaks. And so it's been very forgiving, but also it's kind of limiting. And so throwing in components of programmability, I mean, it's not really programming, but it's got little aspects, little hints of programming. Nothing presumably is really going to break. It just won't look the way you want it. So it's still presentational. But I think this is the way it needs to go. The shame, though, is that I'm now elderly. Learning all these new things will probably be something that I will do from afar. It'll only be at the point where I actually need to use it. It will be interesting, though, because you were mentioning about page builders and things like that. It will be interesting to see if it is possible to force this into a UI of a page builder at some point. I'm struggling to see how that would be possible, given how things work at the moment, because you've got this really limited palette of things that you can do in CSS. And so page builders can pretty much do all of those. But now that we're moving to a much more kind of ephemeral, you don't quite know how anything's going to look given any screen size. You have some intuition, but it's not quite going to be there. It'll be interesting to see how that works, because viewports and widths of viewports and all of that is kind of going out the window.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's, I think it's the problem when the CSS is never one thing. And I think even more so, it's now kind of two things. So I imagine now, if I'm not good at, logical programming and the mentality you need to have that, it probably doesn't matter because there are other CSS experts who make generators that I can use.
Right.
And
okay.
As long as I understand how they work and what values need to be changed, that's probably all I need to know. Because at the end of most of the hard work is done by the browser these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are just telling it how to do, its hints again to the browser, so it does all the work.
Have you become an aficionado of these generators then? Have you got a nice long list of generators to achieve particular things? Is it a case of you have to go and Google to find the generators, or are they all housed in one place? Is there one authority that seems to be really good at creating those kind of generators?
Yeah, I think otherwise we end up, there's a danger of going back to the bad old days of learning CSS where you go to Stack Overflow and paste somebody's solution into your sheets. So I think there are things like, Utopia as a fluid typography generator is the thing that I start off with. Again, that may have to change. There's other things that impact on that. We get trigonometry come into CSS as well, which means that you could, rather than have this absolute straight line linear change from your font sizes, you could tail that off or whatever with this. So there might be changes that happen with that. Miriam Suzanne talked about fluid typography. One of the big bugs that she's got at the moment is that she likes big font sizes on websites. But if she sets her own screen to a big font size, these will relatively sort of grow. So some of the sites that she likes who have big font sizes, she makes them look a bit too big. if she
Okay.
goes and sets her preference. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
That's
no, it's okay. She's an expert.
I know, but yes, I mean, up to now, that's the best thing, and that's what she uses as well.
Yeah.
Utopia, and the reason I like that is because the people behind it, Clear Left is the company behind it. We've got Jeremy Keefe behind it. He's somebody who's, at least has to go through the process. He wrote the more definitive guide on HTML5. So somebody who you can trust to know what's going on in the W3C. So I'd be very cautious about any generator there. But I mean, I think I'll move through some. I'm jumping so far ahead on this.
It's okay. Let's rein it back in, and shall we go back to our document on the screen? So if you're listening to this, then it's on the screen.
So we'll just talk a little bit. So one of the things, I was doing that presentation for your event there, and I suddenly thought, am I sounding like the W3C has got a plan or something in mind with the direction we're going? Because I don't think they do, because I think when we're looking at CSS direction, it's always unknown, because it's always done by consensus with the stakeholders that are involved. Now,
that's the case with anything like this, though, isn't it? You see a direction because it's had a trajectory when you look over your shoulder. It's gone from there to here, so it must have a direction from here to somewhere in the future. And of course, it really doesn't. There isn't that kind of times arrow approach to it. But because it's more of a community-based project. But I mean, there must be some threads that we can pull out of, okay, it's very likely to go in this direction, I would have thought. But no, there's no way of actually know. Well, maybe in the very near term we know, but in the decade long term, no.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, the one thing about reconnecting with the W3C and what's going on there and the debates there is that you do get some hint about, you do know the future to a certain degree. At least you know what's coming to browsers,
right?
What's been agreed on. So inline if statements is something agreed on, but it's not appeared in our browsers. A lot of stuff is appearing very quickly.
Yeah, but tsunami is coming, David. Yeah.
But also you can see the discussions, and I think the big discussion has been getting right back, as we've been saying on the show, to the beginnings again, and this HTML first, and then the web always has to protect the content, always. So we style around it, and now everything has to be fluid. We have to start getting back that way. And it's very difficult if you've been in, what I've been doing is creating visual designs for clients with a page builder to sort of switch that entirely upside down, because you've always started with the static design in your head, of which you're trying to recreate so we really happen to flip that greatly to be able to get. And I think once you do that, you line yourself up with what you see as the conversations that always come out of the W3C. So you know that we are kind of heading that way. And we know that technically we have to head that way, because how else will we accommodate all the browsers? All the different devices.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so I do think we get caught as well. The direction's difficult, because I think I put a little note here just saying that W3C, did I write it? Yeah. Oh, it's not in its own point, but the W3C thinks about long-term problems. That's its mainly focus. So it's very cautious, where the commercial world thinks more short-term solutions all the time. So you have this, I think you have this tortoise and hare situation going on all the time, where, in a time where CSS hadn't sorted out problems of being responsiveness, if you like, in the early 2010s, I think page builders have grown very strongly, because they had a much better short-term solution for the fact that we needed to sort out these designs. We did it.
Yeah.
Just what I mean. And I think it had its time where it solved the problems, but now I think it's flipping the other way. The tortoise is catching up, because they thought it's taken a long time to get grid out there. It's taken like 10 years of trying to get grid, a proper layout system, and it's taken all this time. But I think now it started, things really speeded up again. So I think the tortoise, the W3C, in my mind, is overtaking the hare, which has been a lot of our research.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting as well, because if you think about it, we are trying to put pixels on a page. At the end of the day, that's it. And we've had, 20 odd years of trying to get this right, in air quotes. I wonder how much innovation there actually is. How long can we keep innovating in putting pixels on pages in interesting ways? And maybe that's just the problem. For the last 20 years, there have been ways to innovate. Okay, we want this kind of masonry style layout, or we want things to overlap each other, and then when we narrow the viewport, we want the text to grow or the text to shrink or things to just collide with each other or disappear. You get what I'm saying. But the point being, can we continue to innovate the way that we do layouts? And if that's not the case, if there is kind of an end to that road, maybe that's where we're at with the W3C. Maybe it's because there is kind of more of an end in sight. There is a limitation to how innovative we can be with our layouts, and it's taken the commercial things to demonstrate what might be possible, and now the standards-based approach can finally catch up, because there isn't too much runway left, if you know what I mean. I don't know if there's anything in that really, but
I would question though the first thing you said there about we're just trying to put pixels on a page, and I think no, I think this is where a lot of it's gone wrong. I think no, we're trying to use the web to communicate with other people.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah.
And I think that's the starting point. And in communicating, we often, which is generally text-based, we then need to, as any good designer for UX needs to do, is to make that something where you can easily and comfortably see that content, and it's easy to understand the hierarchy of that content, what's important in that content. So the rest of what we're doing is essentially presenting messaging.
Yeah.
So I start from that point of view, and I think that's the WE. I think if we get back to the origins of the web, which has got lost along the way, is the fact that this is an information sharing tool for everybody to be able to use. HTML, anybody should be able to write and get their website on there, get their message out. And then it's the levels from there of styling that we do that gets it more professional. So anybody can do a basic styling and make it look quite presentable. But then, why we'll always be in need of a job, even if everybody can make their own simple websites and communicate. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
There's a profession for us in expanding that. And I think if we start from that perspective, rather than pixels on a page, we've already set ourselves that we're creating a visual medium of which in that we are stuffing in our messaging.
Right. That is interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Also, whilst you were saying all of that, it suddenly occurred to me that everything is driven by the current state of the tech that we have, like hold the physical tech. So, start with computers, two-dimensional interface is quite large, the screen, and then we move to things more rectangular based in our hands. And I have no idea what will come in that sphere. Maybe we'll be looking at the internet through glasses or goggles, or maybe there'll be just some sort of three-dimensional presentation layer that will like augmented reality will become something interesting. And so this two-dimensional flat rectangular thing that we face either in our hand or on a screen, maybe that will be supplanted by something else, and then this whole thing will start again. Be interesting.
I'll put it as notes later, because it's interesting, because even in the thing that you do with the WP builds, I was listening into one of the chats there about, a website's important any longer. Then there's another debate going on about how much clients need to be charged to start a website. And they so depressed me, these conversations, because I thought, if we get back to the way I'm now starting to see it as like, well, this is all a global communication tool that anyone can actually use, and that we try and make it more beautiful and presentable to the different mediums. All that kind of stuff doesn't make any sense any longer. Why is it going to dissipate? What's going to happen to communication? Yes, if you think of it as a way of putting visuals onto the web, then I can see why all these different technologies are very threatening, or why it might, if you've got that sort of level, but why you might need to charge so much if that's the expectation. But if you start with the fact that, well, I'm sharing my information, my life, my business, whatever on there, but to everybody, that disappears a little bit. And I think it's a better way of talking about it, because then we say, okay, it is HTML first, it is our messaging first. And then actually, even as designers, we should take a UX approach where we start with the content and style around it to make it presentable. That's always been design anyway. So
I do like the way you think deeply about these things. I'm more on it's a 2D surface with pixels on a page, and you've got a whole philosophy behind it, which is fabulous.
But it's not, though, is it? It's just the fact that because I've taken myself off into something I'm uncomfortable with, I've had to think, how do I get, this is what I'm doing here, I'm talking aloud, it's just my so the reason why I'm coming out with this stuff is because I'm thinking, I can't balance this all out. in my own head, but I'm getting.
You're still figuring it out. Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't know what the CSS direction is. Basically, the long and the short of that whole thing was we can't be sure. We have some vague intuitions based upon what's coming into browsers and things like that. But certainly the long-term view, we really are unsure because it's an ongoing project. Okay. So CSS programming, is it a programming language? What's coming? What's here?
Well, and this is why I thought, well, our show should be taking each of these and talking about them. But I just thought, I don't know how I would use them, which we were talking about earlier. So we have functions and mixins coming. And I think @function is something that we can already try in Chrome at the moment. That's come very quickly. That's Miriam and Suzanne's who put forward that project. So anybody who knows the kind of preprocessors like Sass will know mixins. You can kind of create these little, if you like, little tokens, which can, but even I can't remember. I started to learn a little bit of Sass before realizing I probably don't need it. I bet it comes to native CSS and here it's come in. But it does allow you again to have a bit of programming in your style sheet somewhere to affect the rest of your style sheets. But how we use it, I don't know. So I thought, well, let's just cover these. And there's inline if statements or conditionals that are coming as well.
No idea. I've no idea how that could be used. We talked before we hit record that that's still a real
question. Leah Veru is the person who put that forward about a year ago, and then that might be sometime coming to browsers. But it's a kind of like an improvement, I guess, on query and something.
Right.
We've got trigonometry, which is, I think, pretty much already there in the sense that we can do more with our calculations now without have to be so linear.
That word literally trigonometry triggers my.
Yes, you don't know much about trigonometry.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, really? Do we need that? Okay, yeah. No, it'd be really useful. I mean, genuinely useful if you can apply math to the screen and what's going on. I mean,
well, this is where you hope people will do clever stuff with generators.
Right. There's bound to be a ton of people out there who will just run with this and they just understand maths in a way that I just do not. So I'm sure that'll be wonderful. Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come into the typography generators at some point. Or
I was going to say that's going to be a case where the generator will be my best friend. I will not be doing any of that by hand.
I imagine the same it will get. Well, I know because I know there's been discussions between somebody who's mad on making demos all the time, Adam Argyle, who works on the Chrome dev team, is also in the W3C, and Matthias Ott as well, who talked a lot previously about trigonometry and how it can be used. So I think they've been, not that they've come up with something, but combining that with relative colors, which is another one on my list there, you might be able to sort of do some really clever dynamic programming of your whole palettes, if you like.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
But certainly elements within your palette, like the way I'm using it at the moment. So I am now, even though it's only got about 96% support, but I am using relative color just to put that formula as it breaks up the channels into a hover on the button. So whatever my color is at the top of the theme, I don't have to create a new one for the dark. I just let whatever that one is.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I think clever stuff with that. And Has is one that I have managed to get my head around.
That's already widely usable, right?
Exactly. And I mean, already because of the way that it works, because it's the parent selector, things that are in your child can change how the parent behaves. You can use it for switches that you would need JavaScript for before. And
that kind of just leans really into what we already know, doesn't it? There's no great surprises there. You're just kind of leveraging the language of what's already there. So you might be trying to find a child and then the child affects the parents. And that I think that's easy to understand. There's a lot of the cascade in there. And, and I don't know, my head can parse that one much more straightforwardly than the if, for example.
Yes. But even that, you get, I think these things take time first, because there was a lot of tricks that I used that I shown in when we were doing our websites where one of those was the generator as well, that was creating a grid. So you could put your content in kind of, the example really is in a blog post where you might want your centered text very tight so it's readable. You can read, it's not too many characters long. But then you want something to break out. And normally you would have to create your own div for your breakout and then another div again to put things back center, where you use this grid and you use the named lines to be able to say, oh, okay, I want you to go from this start name line to this start name line,
Right,
to this
right.
particular element. So those are calculators that do, and the fluid again, because you're calculating the sort of gap. It narrows as you get, so in the same way that typography does, it sort of stretches. So there are a lot of that, and I lost my point. I did have a point where I was going with this. Oh yes, that was an example of something which I heard of because Rachel Andrews mentioned it before Grid was fully supported in 2017, but it took until about 2000 and I think maybe a couple of years ago for somebody like Kevin Powell to make it more widespread because he discovered it for himself independently that you could do this. So it's interesting how I think a lot of the stuff we've got now will take ages for us to work out, oh, we could combine this with that and do this.
Well, yeah, because they've got two pieces to it, really. You've got the learning how it works. Yes. And then off the back of that, once a bunch of people have learned how it works, then it's those same people figuring out how best to use it in ways that the rest of us can say, oh, yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. So it's all very well throwing trigonometry in, but really, until somebody shows me that's really useful, that affects a website in a positive way, then it's kind of almost like it's an academic paper. It's, that's fun to have trigonometry in there, but until I can see I can do that and it makes sense and the client will think that that's a marvelous innovation, I'm going to be sitting on the fence, I suppose, watching the cleverer people figure it all out.
I mean, one thing you mentioned to me, because you said we should do something on it, is that the thing that's happening now was all these kind of popular design components that used to rely on JavaScript are slowly finding their way into HTML and CSS. Yep. And to me, that makes perfect sense. It has to. We have to get away from JavaScript that will affect content because JavaScript will break in the browser. JavaScript is an imperative language. That's the beauty of the declarative language. We only get to hint, but the browser can change, the web can change, and our code doesn't break. So it's logical, isn't it, that more of this stuff is going to come out of JavaScript when it's at the front end and has the potential to break and not be and stop the web from evolving.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting some really good stuff. So obviously, I'll bring it up. Not that people will be able to see this in the audio, but we've got the carousel thing. Adam Argyle's project they've been doing. It's now available in Chrome everywhere, where you've got these. Carousels is called, but I mean, it's used in so many different ways. Once you get the idea, I mean, it's not a carousel in terms of I forget what the terminology is, but these sort of scroll markers that we have, and basically it's another set of terminology. But we can use these to do whole pages, carousels, tabs we've got on there. All sorts of different,
Some of them just look, I mean, they're just so sublimely nice, aren't they? Look at those.
Yeah.
Much as I hate to, he's called it horizontal cards. I'm calling it a slider. But, yes. I kind of had this whole thing of, I don't really like sliders, but honestly, there's something beguiling about it all being done with just CSS. And the fact that you can do, I mean, look at that. That's just so, I mean, like, look, finger-sized buttons that are round that your finger would just really navigate towards. It's beautiful.
There's always I think they've solved the problem with this set of, I mean, it's called carousels. I think that's really misleading because the set of new stuff that we've got in there just allows us to play. And it's still just hide and show stuff. There's points where we need things to be contained in a little box somewhere where we hide it away as secondary content. We'll always need that. And effectively, so, talking about slider, I think being terrible, it's because we've got this concept of it. But effectively, they're all
versions of slider. Yeah, there's one thing which is the focus and everything else is somehow receiving some kind of hidden state. I suppose it's less hidden there, but they're great. Yeah. They're really great. So I'll just speak this into the URL is chrome.dev/carousel. If you wanted to go and check out, there's so many interesting examples. Some of them are just wildly cool.
And I went to the configurator there. So they got a little configurator so you can start to work out what your code is. And this is, again, another example of a generator where I think all of us will need to turn these on to see what the code means so we can use it in our projects. And anyway, let me go back. And there's another one which I've been looking into, which is accordion. So only just recently with accordions. Now, because you use it on your site, we have the
summary,
details and summary. Yes.
Summary, yeah.
Tags. So, and with that, I mean, they are disclosure patterns, as they're called in W3C, where they disclose the information that's in them. And they are great by default because they are, and I didn't really realize this, that they're searchable. So content within it is searchable.
Yep.
And they're accessible because the browser, again, is opening up and then doing all the stuff. So, people are tabbing or need to.
They're literally perfect for like SEO and hiding content. So I use it for transcripts because it's right there, but it's invisible. So the search engine sees it. But it's it's an accordion. It looks like an accordion.
And it's the same same for this show as well. We've got it in there and it'll stay in there. But the interesting thing is we can turn it into an accordion where what people expect with an accordion is that if you open one, the other one, they're conscious of each other.
Right.
And now we can do that. If we put a named attribute against the details, now it will automatically open one when they're all the same name.
Yeah, they're getting that grouping aspect, aren't they? I think it is called, isn't it called grouping? Or I can't remember, but they've got awareness of one another. So if you do this to the third one, the second one will collapse and so on. Yeah,
exactly. You just put the same name against
the name. It's the name attribute. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Against that, and it does it. But it's really fascinating because I was watching. I'm doing a course, Practical Accessibility, by Sarah Dunn. I'm not sure if I'm saying her surname correctly. She's brilliant, but she's just done an update on that one. And suddenly you realize, we'll do an episode on this, I think. You realize that suddenly it's not as simple as you think. You realize there's accessibility issues with the fact that something closes when something else opens. And anyway, we'll get into that. But there's also pop-ups as well that we're seeing, which again is another pattern that we need to display and hide content and have it show up. So I think that's it. Anyway, we've gone off into another episode.
It's okay. So what does it mean?
What does it mean? So all this programmable, flexible stuff. Yeah. So I think it's impacting, as mentioned before, I think hand coders. So I mentioned that Kevin Powell, he got people really upset, and he did a talk on it at last year's CSS day on overnet engineering CSS. And it's one of the things, and I thought it's really fascinating, this whole discussion with him. He showed a bit of CSS, which was modern and seemed complex, and people jumped on him saying, this guy's a newbie, doesn't know what he's talking about. It should be readable. Everything should be readable. And he's gone to the other view of this, where he agreed with that first. It should be readable. But I think it's no longer, CSS is no longer just this presentational code where we can just read it and understand what it is now. I think we have to accept that if we're going to make the most of it, we're going to have to put some really complex stuff in, even when you're using something like grid or something, when you use that RAM technique that I talked about, repeat, auto fit, and min-max to do a clever calculation, which no one can really remember the syntax to write that out, or it's just struggle to do that.
No, but also this is just how it evolves, isn't it? Like nobody intended it to become complicated, but with the expectations of what we want to see, it has to be. I mean, if anybody can figure out how to make it and it not be complicated, you will be everybody's best friend. But it is complicated because, well, it's complicated. There's no way around it.
I think if you can compartmentalize that, and that's the biggest trouble with me. On one hand, that you want to say, because having convinced myself that CSS is fundamentally simple, we had an episode when we were talking about that very point that Rachel Andrew and her talk was saying about, you just need to learn this, you don't need to get carried away. And that is still true. But in terms of employing some of this more programmatic, telling the browser to do really clever stuff, then it has to get a little bit more mathematical. And
it'll be kind of interesting if we end up with kind of a stratified workforce in the CSS space.
It feels like that.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like there are those people who are kind of entry level, for want of a better word, junior CSS developers. Well, I mean, I'm not even there, but then you get the more senior, more experienced engineers, developers, whatever you want to call them, because it is going to be more difficult. And using the simple stuff will still work. It's not like you're going to break things. It's just you won't be able to push the boundaries quite in the same way. That'll be interesting. See if the job market does sort of acknowledge that and accommodate that, and whether salaries and things like that will be affected by it.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping clever people will keep coming up with recipes for me that I can steal.
Right. So you can appear to be clever on standing on the shoulders of giants. Let's
exactly.
Yeah.
Page builders as well. I mean, we sort of covered that in a way, but it just realized. I mean, I think page builders will always still be there. My little talk that I do for your thing is really the fact that I think there could be, because page builders do all that stuff that I get Eleventy to do. I need all of that managing of the code, dynamically inserting it in places. And I think page builders have always been good at presenting sort of templates and recipes to us in our workflow as we need it. I just think they need to change,
Yeah.
So my last bit on here was just, again, it's me comforting myself here. Coping with
how to cope. Tell me, lie down on the couch and tell me about your father.
Yes. How to cope with more complex CSS. Well, I think the thing is I was comforted listening to some real CSS experts. I think on the YouTube channel, Bad at CSS, I think they were talking about this. Some people much smarter and been doing it a lot longer than I have, talking about the fact that they hadn't got their head around this particular thing in CSS. It's on their list, and they're just dealing with it one at a time. You see, they can still do their job, but it's more difficult for me because I feel I have to consume it all because I'm just getting back into it.
I think at the minute you've got a really insatiable appetite for this stuff, and I think maybe that's maybe that drives your curiosity, which is brilliant, but also it kind of presents you with this just wall of things that you have to learn. And, you forgive yourself, David. be accepting that wall doesn't need to be climbed in one go. You've got days and weeks and months ahead.
But it has all kind of come into place for me. Well, you can blow this apart. I mean, please do. But I mean, for me now, you'll remember that I was a big fan of a talk that was on your Page Builder Summit by Elizabeth.
Laura Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. About UX design. And I realized it was a common thread for a lot of people to begin with the content and then use these design rules of proximity, spacing, so it's standard, color, using some of the rules that you can. Anybody can be a designer. If you start with that content and think, well, how I'm going to use space and that to, set out the hierarchy and what's important on it. And I think, well, now we're being encouraged to intrinsically, or at least think how the browser will deal with your stuff. I think this transfers this same idea because you start with HTML content first, that's semantic. If you think about the content and how it should be marked up and how it might work, you cut out a whole load of the plugging in the accessibility and performance issues that are created later by ignoring that in the first place. And then you get your messaging right. So I think that whole way of it sort of connects up to UX design as we should be designing with how I think we need to design a little bit more in the browser, or at least in our minds, we need to know how content works in the real world in the browser in different circumstances before we can get to, sketching it out on something static so we can visually see it. So I think we're going between the two. But that gives me a sort of system. If I concentrate on those, then I realize that stuff that Rachel Andrew was saying about, well, you really only need to understand, well, with CSS, you first need to understand how the cascade works and your elements, and now you can style those with the basic rules. That's simple stuff. Then you just need to learn that these display modes change flow in a different way. Once you've grasped that, you've got how you can change your layout from the standard normal flow. Then you just how you align that and how you size it. Then you've got a sort of layout model of which then I think on top of it, and that's where I think, well, I can't keep up with somebody like Adam Argyle, who will spend all of the time working out how to set up these demos, and many other people like him, Bramus Van Dam's another person like that, who will experiment with absolutely everything. Same as, in the accessibility side, the people who sit there and go through all of that saying, how does this read out on JAWS? How does this read out on NVDA? How does this read out on Narrator and stuff? They do all of that work, and then they come up with formulas for you. So I actually think there will be these high-level CSS people, but I think for most of the projects we do, we can, as you say, stand on the shoulders of giants for that, as long as we get the basics in place.
Right. And it kind of feels like the cake analogy comes in. The cake will be tasty because it's a nicely made cake. But if you want it to look nice and have all the, the icing, as it were, that's where I'm going with this, the icing on the cake, and make it look pretty, then there will be these complicated things that you can leverage. But I would imagine, I could be completely wrong about this, I would imagine most of the clients that you're dealing with probably won't have the desire to use a lot of those things, and nor will you be able to crowbar it unless you become really adept at it and can do it in a heartbeat. It may not be economically viable. Economically viable. You know what I mean? Like the cost benefit analysis for you. Okay, can I force these things in? Is it worth forcing in? Is it going to take me another 6 hours? Will the budget meet that extra 6 hours? I think a lot of this stuff is fascinating at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see whether it becomes widely deployed. It feels at the minute as if it's still a long way off. It's still, in many cases, real edge case. It's difficult. It's hard to understand because it's not, not the basic stuff that we're used to. But it's very exciting. And I would imagine we'll see the enterprise agencies adopting this and pushing the boundaries, and the people who you constantly reference will be using it, creating tutorials, making examples, making component-driven generators, and all of those kind of things, which will be fascinating. But I suppose if you look through the history of something like CSS tricks, you'll see an awful lot in there. Thousands of articles, most of which probably never got used by you or me, because they weren't necessary. They were interesting, and they were pushing the boundaries. But let's wait and see.
Just feel a little bit though. I noticed obviously we did these 3 demos, and we'll do probably more of these in the future. They were quite easy to do because I was using a bunch of these generators, basically 3 sites with the same code. Effectively. With this generated content that I found, which at least I understood, moved around. That's basically what those 3 sites are. So it's easy to create them. But I do think I have to remind myself about this. And I think with all of the pressing debates that you get in about technology is moving so fast, I think if we step back and just go, what are we trying to do here? We're just trying to communicate.
Right. Exactly. That was kind of where I was going. I was trying to encapsulate that in my sentence. Like, will it assist your communication? Maybe.
Yeah, and I think you build from there, don't you? And that's why you can do cheap sites for clients, or you can teach somebody to do their own stuff. If they want to improve on it, we just keep doing it, and then we borrow from somebody else. And then when you get to a really high level, then you'll be doing the real CSS programming, which I will never reach those dizzy heights because my brain doesn't work like that. But I thought for our content, that I wanted to do this episode because I thought what we could try and do a little bit of, because we tried to build some sites and then we rushed over explaining how they were stuck together. I thought what might be nice is to sort of break it up into a whole series of where we'll look at the different components. I think that's a brilliant idea. Do one component at a time, with a clearly labeled title, so that it's obvious. Okay, we're only doing this thing. That would be great. I think people will enjoy that content a lot. I think that's a great idea. Yeah. I think that's the direction for us. We'll do an episode where we'll work out which components we actually do need and don't. Yes.
Okay, so are we done for this one? I think
so. Enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fabulous. In which case, we're all rectangular again. In which case, I will bid you farewell, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.